We're here live at PyCon 2023 in Salt Lake City, Utah. With me is an absolute legend in the space, both in the Microsoft space and in the Python space, probably arguably more in the Python space. Core contributor or core developer for 20 years now, longtime member of the Python Steering Council, VS Code all around Python, knowledge machine. I think that's probably the best way to label it. Brett Cannon. Brett, how's it going?
Good. It's day 5 for me at the conference since I've been here since the Language Summit on Wednesday. So
Okay.
starting to drag a bit, but otherwise still good, still happy.
Very cool.
Great to be here.
Really quick, what happens in a language summit? Because I think a lot of people don't get a lot of insight on that space.
Yeah, so the Language Summit is invite only and it's closed to the public. Group meeting of core developers who happen to be here at PyCon. And effectively, it's one of only 2 direct opportunities that we have to get together as a group and just discuss things and figure things out and kind of make decisions. Well, not decisions because we have to include everyone who couldn't make it, but at least kind of get a feel for the room and kind of say, like, we think this is where we want to go. We'll double check online first with everyone else who's just physically not here, but just have in-group discussions about the future of Python and the past and just kind of what we want to do. Because as an online open source project, we're distributed across the world and we don't typically get this opportunity to be together. And this is one of 2. The other one's the core dev sprints that typically happen in the fall, September, October, November, around there. And so it's just an opportunity for us to get together. It's closed door just because we want to have no pressure from anyone to try to answer questions from anyone. We want to be very focused on the work. And sometimes, honestly, we talk about some sensitive topics, like we talked about burnout on Wednesday and all that. We want to make sure people feel comfortable sharing whatever they wanted to share in that room. Because in that room, we've all been working together most of us for quite a while. I mean, there are obviously new members, but we've all become friends, and so we all feel comfortable sharing among ourselves, but not necessarily with some random person in the room. There will be blog posts, though, summarizing everything. I always make sure there's someone in the room, some journalist of some sort that can take notes and then summarize everything. So all the information that's there will get shared out to the community. So it still happens to be closed door. When it happens, the information still disseminates out like a good open source project.
I actually like that model of, like, there's a lot of thought that goes in that doesn't, there's a lot of explanation of that thought that you just can't condense down to, hey, I'm going to disseminate this to millions of people and everyone is going to understand. So often it's like we have to have these conversations, and then once we figure out the best way to explain it so as many people will get it, that's when we, hey, we're going to do this. Here are a few of the reasons why. And then some of the other reasons, like, don't necessarily translate well. I don't think the millions of people are like, oh, burnout. Yeah, like, I totally get that, right?
Yeah, I mean, some topics get a lot of broad interest from people, and some of them are extremely niche, and most people will never know or care. For instance, there was a lot of discussions about the C API this year, and that's a somewhat niche thing. Not everyone's developing extension modules using C, or the C API at least. So some people will find that really interesting, while some other talks on some other things might get really broad interest. It really runs the gamut.
Very cool. So you've been in the core development ecosystem for 20 years now.
Yes.
Yeah. And sorry, not to put emphasis on that.
No. It was very weird to celebrate that exact milestone of April 18th, 2003, when I made my very first commit as a core developer, the day before this conference. So it was a bit surreal, and then show up here, and this is the 20th year of PyCon, and I've been lucky enough to attend either physically or virtually since the founding of the conference under this name. So it's been a somewhat surreal experience this year to be here.
I know a lot of folks like to ask Guido this, but like, how has it changed over the 20 years? And I mean, like, Python, but also like the Python community that's kind of centered around PyCon US.
I'm extremely lucky that I was able to get involved when I did, right? When I got involved in Python, way back in 2002 actually is when I first started to get involved in the development of it. And I learned Python in the fall of 2000. And back then, Python was just not the juggernaut that it's become, right? I mean, back then, it was very common to run into people who had no idea what the heck Python was, or is it that language where white space matters, right? So I've seen it grow from this somewhat niche thing where there's a group of wonderful people is hanging out and just trying to develop this language that we all fell in love with, to just make it better and just make it more available and useful to others, to this, where we're in a conference center with like 1,500, 2,000 attendees. I don't even know the exact count. We've gone up as high as like, I think 4,000 at some of the conferences pre-pandemic. And having tens of millions of users, it still blows my mind anytime I actually sit down and actually think about it. So it shifted from mostly just being a mailing list and Usenet, right, around the community.
It's still a mailing list.
Well, actually, we've shifted the mailing list. Most of the mailing lists have actually become pretty much marginalized and not used very much, and we've mostly to discourse.
Okay.
Because that's one of the shifts, right? Like early 2000s, email and Usenet was the way people communicate, but these days people use websites. They don't use email. Like their entire countries and cultural groups that have never latched onto email. Honestly, kids these days don't use email, right? It's the thing you use at work or the thing your parents use, right? It's just not how they communicate anymore. And so we've actually moved most of that stuff over onto discourse at discuss.python.org, I think for various reasons. It's to make sure we staying relevant sounds a little weird, but it's mainly making sure we can still have the reach to anyone who wants to come and join but doesn't want to necessarily use old technology, while still being welcoming to everyone who might honestly not be used to that piece of technology because they've used stuff historically differently. There's also tooling reasons, right? Like enforcing code of conduct is easier on discuss.python.org than per mailing list and very simple things. But like that's just an example of the shift, right? Is going from a mailing list of just a few people just working together, trying to make this thing better, to being a much larger team and just shifting literally how we communicate and all that. I mean, but the one consistency is the community, right? Like Guido did a great job when he was running things of engendering this concept that it's about the community, it's about the people. Like we want to be welcoming, we want to be open, right? Like diversity and inclusion is not lip service in this community. It means something, right? It is the fundamental thing that drives a lot of us that contribute to the language directly and the community overall. And that's been at least one key consistency. After that is the technology and just how big the team is and some of the pressures and maybe being a little less blasé about breaking code because there's a few more people in the world who care now than back then. And then after that is honestly just the weirdness, at least for me, of people now know what the heck I mean when I say Python and they go, oh yeah, I use it. And they're like, oh, okay. And having become rarer and rarer.
I use it and I'm like a cartographer.
Yeah, right? Like, I mean, in the early days, it was like, it ran the gamut still, but it was like, yeah, web, it was sysadmins, it was people using like ArcGIS for like orthophotography kind of stuff and that sort of realm. And then just the number of realms that Python somehow got pulled into just kept growing and growing while maintaining and retaining the groups we already had. I mean, it's been phenomenal. I think it's a true testament, once again, to what Guido initially set up, and I think to everyone on the core team, I'm excluding myself, for developing the language in a way. And once again, having this community be what it is to cause people to want to put in that time and effort to grow it, to try to bring more people in and say like, hey, there's this wonderful place I want you to be a part of and participate in, right? Like, it's not a grab bag, I want more users. It's not literally, I want to create a safe space for everyone who wants to be in this industry, in this world, such that they have a place to go, right? That's honestly my personal motivation, right? Like, I want to create that space. And that's really what I do it for. I don't do it for the tech anymore. I really do it because I care about all the people in this building right now and everyone out there and the internet and the world, and just trying to give them a place where they can come and feel welcome and still get their work done.
Some would say you came for the tech and you stayed for the community.
It's exactly what I did. I came for the language and I stayed for the community.
You've mentioned kind of that transition state, And you also mentioned Guido a couple of times, Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python.
Hmm.
Um, I know he's kind of taken a little bit more, not, I don't want to say a backseat, but he's kind of stepped down from his role of the primary decision maker
Yep.
in the language and opted for a steering council, which you've been on for the past few years.
Yep.
How has that transition been now that we're a few years removed from it first happening, and what do you think has maybe been the biggest change to work with in that?
So when Guido retired in 2017, I believe, and then we formed the steering council in 2018, probably the biggest shift was honestly somewhat momentum, just because when it was all under Guido as a benevolent dictator for life, the BDFL, he could make decisions as quickly as he wanted. While the steering council tries to rule by consensus, right? We don't try to just arbitrarily make decisions for the core devs. We try to talk with the core dev team and go like, all right, everybody, what do you think? Do you want this? Do you not? And if there's a very prevailing viewpoint, that's what we'll go with. But when there's kind of like, can't quite get a clear read of what people want, that's when it's up to the steering council to make that call. And since there's 5 of us, it just takes a bit more effort, right? Like sometimes we all agree and it's done. We know what we want, and sometimes it's more like 2 versus 3, or 2 and someone's on the fence, and just requires more discussion, and we just keep discussing until we can kind of come to some kind of conclusion. And so that's probably honestly the biggest, is just that. Hopefully Guido's stress level's gone down since he doesn't have to shoulder that whole burden anymore.
Right.
But I mean, at this point, the funny thing is Guido's just another core developer, right? He has no magic powers anymore, other than we trust his opinion and Yella, another core dev's opinion when it comes to typing stuff. But effectively, otherwise, Guido's just another core dev, and he doesn't get any magic privileges or anything like that. So.
And you've mentioned in that same discourse that this is the last time that you're serving as a steering council member.
Yep.
Just think it's time to pack it up, or?
Yeah. So I mean, I've been on the steering council since its founding. I am currently the remaining member of the steering council from that first cohort. And when we were setting up the governance structure, because when Guido decided he wanted to stop being the BDFL, he left it all up to us to decide what governance model we wanted. And when we were doing that, one of the things I said was, I would be totally happy if we had term limits. And I said, like, maybe 5 years is probably a good amount of time to kind of cap it, because that's basically one single version's lifetime, since we will support a Python version with security fixes all the way up to 5 years since initial release. And when it came to this year, I was going like, yeah, you know what? I said 5 years was a good amount of time, and I'm going to stick to my word that that's a good amount of time. And I just decided, like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to step down. I'm going to guarantee there's an open seat, because there's not necessarily if no one steps down. And I want to make sure that there's an opportunity to at least have some growth and change, right? I don't want it to become like, oh, Brett's the crotchety old member of the steering council who's not gotten off in the last 10 or 20 years. I want to be able to step aside, let someone else come in and give it a try, and honestly just get some fresh perspective in there. I mean, which we do have, right? Like it's rather totally by accident, but if you look at the 5 steering council members, there's someone on their first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and fifth year. So we've managed to have a really nice spread of time on the council. And I think that's great, and I honestly think it should continue. So me getting off at year 5 and letting someone else new come in, and if those 4 stick on, I mean, depending on the votes, I think that continues a great trend. And I'm not saying I won't necessarily go back to the steering council someday, but I want to make sure there's at least that 4 stop point, so that no one keeps voting for me basically because, oh, I know Brett and he's already on it. Yeah, sure, just check. Versus, no, I think Brett should be on it.
I like that. And stepping away from the steering council, do you think that that's going to give you maybe more opportunities to work on more PEPs, more contributions? I don't want to replace work with more work, but what is planned for you in the Python ecosystem post steering council?
I mean, we'll definitely give me more time. I mean, the steering council is not exactly a zero-sum game of time usage, right? We meet every week for an hour and a half, sometimes a little more depending on if meetings just run long. And then just all of the kind of homework as it is, right? Like greeting the peps that have come in, having discussions on discourse, anything that might come in that's kind of more of a gotta solve this or get an answer to some people before the end of the week or before our next meeting. So I'll definitely be gaining back a bit of time. Um, I'll probably just sync it to whatever current project I'm working on. I'm doing all that WebAssembly work right now and trying to keep that up and going and seeing what we can do for WebAssembly. In the packaging side, I've been working towards trying to hopefully get us a lock file format standard someday. And then I've got my little side project, the Python lecture for Unix. But that's my personal thing that I do for fun. Yeah, I got plenty cooking right now, so I am not worried about where that free time is going to go because it's probably going to go right back into Python.
I love it. So for the last question, I want to kind of shift it to, I don't want to say your professional work, because I feel like all of this is professional work, but more professional work, I guess. But
Sure.
your role at Microsoft, you
Yeah.
you do a lot, especially around VS Code, around Python and VS Code. I think a lot of decisions come, through you. And obviously, as a steering council member, you have a lot of insight to not just where Python is, but where it's going. How does that help you in making decisions for the millions of developers that are using Python through VS Code, a tool that you maintain?
So it's actually an interesting feedback loop in a way. So my position as the dev manager for the Python experience in VS Code, Sans, Pylance, and Jupyter, it kind of serves two purposes for me. One is making sure, as you said, that we are able to provide a great experience for the millions of Python developers that are using VS Code. But also I get to see where people's struggles are and then try to feed that back into the community. So for instance, we see people struggling with virtual environments. So we decide to add a create environment community. But as part of that work as well, in terms of just kind of seeing where there's problems, I also kind of noticed that there was no good way for tools and stuff to understand packaging, because there were tools that were keeping all their details kind of in custom file formats, right? And us trying to keep on top of every single tool is just it's a loser's game. You'll never pull it off. There's just too many tools out there, which is fantastic, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that we should stop having great tools and so many of them. It's just as someone who has to integrate with tools, having them all do their own little thing when it's not necessary is a bit of a struggle for us. So that's when I helped add project data, metadata into pyproject.toml, because by doing that, we can support one file format and have it magically work across a whole bunch of tools. And so I was able to see that from that perspective, from the work that we do in VS Code, to realize, oh, there's a gap in the community. Let's see if we can go back and kind of give back to the community to try to improve everyone's life. And so it goes both ways, right? As I said, we can see the problems and help out with VS Code as best we can, but then I can also use that position in VS Code to get a wider view of the community and then use that to try to improve things for everybody.
I like it. So we're on day 3 of talks.
Yes.
Day 5 for you,
Yeah.
because you've been super busy. What left at PyCon are you excited about or wanting to check out?
Well, we still have Carol Willing's keynote, so I'm curious to see. Carol's a friend, so I'm really interested to see what she's going to talk about. Guido's giving, I believe, a retrospective on 20 years of PyCon, so I'm going to be very curious to see what he says about that, having actually been at most of them, so I'm interested to see what his opinion is. There's going to be a packaging summit, part 2 today from 1 to 3, so I'll be in there talking about whatever's coming up in those talks. And then after that, hopefully relaxing a bit. I love PyCon. It's a bit exhausting. I like to call myself an outgoing introvert. When I'm at PyCon, I try to be very social and talk with people, but I am emotionally drained as an introvert after talking to so many people. So I typically need like a good week to myself to just relax and not see a bunch of new people. So yeah, I think I'm just going to relax.
Well, awesome. Well, I feel like you've definitely earned it after 20 plus years of core developer service and 5 years of steering council service, and probably arguably the longest attendance record for PyCon. Brett Cannon, thank you so much, not just for this interview, but for all you do in the Python community. My guest has been Brett Cannon. Again, I've been Jay Miller. We're here in Salt Lake City, Utah at PyCon 2023. Next year, we'll be in Pittsburgh. So if you are considering joining us, I'm sure Brett will be there. Hopefully, I'll be there too to join him.
That's the
But
plan.
until next time, have a good one.